You have got to let go of this. There is nothing you can do about it. That was the advice I received from well-meaning friends and colleagues as I began to discuss an idea that I had in response to a local tragedy, the abduction and murder of a child. They couldn't see how, or just didn't believe that one person, one ordinary woman, could really make any difference in this world. Well, they were mistaken. Now, granted, I don't have a college degree or a very impressive title or resume, but what I do have is a compassionate heart, a deep sense of connection to all humanity, a very special love for children, and a stubborn streak that simply refuses to accept the unacceptable. And as it turned out, that was enough. It began January 13th of 1996. As I arrived home from work, I noticed the TV was on. No one was watching it, but it was on. And what caught my eye immediately is that someone's home video was being shown. So curious, I sat down to watch. A precious little girl was opening her Christmas gifts only a few weeks earlier, showing everyone her new Barbie dolls, riding her bike, waving and smiling at the camera, and I was hooked. I couldn't wait to learn what this child had done that was so outstanding it warranted having her home movies on the evening news. Well, within seconds, my curiosity turned to heartbreak when the news anchor returned and announced that only hours earlier, that little 9-year-old had been forcibly yanked off that bicycle, thrown kicking and screaming into a dark-colored pickup truck, and within seconds, she was gone. There was one witness, and he did call 911. However, during the first critical hours and minutes, the public remained unaware. Now, not watching the news on a regular basis, I have never developed the ability to distance myself emotionally when I witness a tragedy. And here I was as a parent watching every parent's worst nightmare unfold in front of my very eyes. So even though I didn't know her personally, I was still very deeply affected by this. The entire community watched, waited, and prayed for her safe return. And during that time, the media was literally begging for information. If you saw anything that might help, please don't hesitate to call. But no helpful information was forthcoming. And then on the third night, I cried, along with many others, when we learned that a man, while walking his dog, had spotted her small, lifeless body laying in a creek bed about 4 miles from where she'd been taken. That little girl's name was Amber Hagerman. The entire community grieved. We were in shock. How could this happen? And in broad daylight. And what especially bothered me is that no one saw them. Now, let's be honest. Invisible is impossible. Common sense dictates you cannot drive a large vehicle through a densely populated area and not be seen. So the problem really wasn't that no one saw them. It's no one recalled what they'd seen. They had no reason to. How many black cars did you see on the way here today? Red ones, white ones. We have no clue. There simply had to be a better way to handle these situations. It was too late to help Amber, but what about the next one and the next? To my way of thinking, be it a gated community or a ghetto, if one child isn't safe, no child is safe. And if that's not unacceptable, then I don't know what is. Honestly, I began to obsess about this. And I found my thoughts constantly drifted back to something I had witnessed many years earlier when we lived overseas. One day, in a very crowded, busy shopping area, a little girl had become separated from her mother and was lost. And I watched and listened as the frantic young mother gave her child's description to some helpful bystanders, who in turn told the person next to them, who told the person next to them, who told the person next to them. You see what's happening here? This wave of information began to flow through the entire area, and everyone became involved. Well, needless to say, within a very short period of time, someone spotted the little girl and returned her safely to her very thankful mother. I realized that was the key. Everyone became involved. But how could we do that here? Life is so different here. We spend so much of our time disconnected in our vehicles, rushing from one place to another. How could we bridge that gap and connect and inform people here? That was the question, and I became determined to find an answer. Now, I confess I was very disappointed by the lack of support I received initially. But my heart and my stubborn streak just wouldn't let me give up. So I kept on trying and kept on talking. And then one day, my dear friend and client, the late Reverend Tom Stoker, came to my office and listened very patiently as I described one of my first ideas, which was a voluntary cell phone system. And then Tom uttered the magic words. He said, "What about the radio?" The light went on. I said, "Wow, Tom, do you think they would do it?" He said, "Well, they do it for civil defense and things like that. Why not this?" Oh, I must have asked him a dozen questions. Who do you know? Who should I call? What should I say? At which point, Tom said, "That's all up to you." And then he very graciously reminded me he had come to the office for therapy on a painful neck and shoulder issue, not to brainstorm with me about my ideas. However, his encouragement and his suggestion allowed the solution to become clear. Before he left that day, Tom made me promise that I would take action on my idea that day. And I kept that promise. I decided to call the radio station that I listened to most often, and one that had been very proactive before and even after the investigation, KDMX in Dallas-Fort Worth. As I reached for the phone to make that call, I was terrified. A tidal wave of self-doubt crashed down on top of me. I mean, maybe the others were right. After all, who did I think I was to be able to change the system, improve the status quo? I was so afraid on so many levels that I wasn't enough. But when I thought about it, I believed from the get-go that this plan would work because I believe in the goodness in people. And if it did work, even just once, and one precious little life was spared, that was so much bigger and so much more important than all of my ego-based fear that I picked up the phone and made that call. Kim Ashley, a young disc jockey, answered the phone. I identified myself and said I was calling regarding the Amber Hagerman case. She immediately asked, "Do you have any information?" I said, "No, regrettably, I do not. However, I do have an idea." I explained, and her response was so positive. She asked that I call back immediately and speak directly with the station manager, Jennifer Grimm. I made that second call. Jennifer's response was equally as positive, and she asked me to please put all the details in writing so that she would be able to present it to all of the area station managers at their next monthly meeting. I wrote the details down, I faxed her that letter, and that was the beginning of the Amber Alert. You see, I had an idea, but I had absolutely no knowledge of how or resources with which to implement the idea. But rather than just let it end there, I chose to pass it on to the people who could. And I believe it was divine guidance because what happened next was nothing short of miraculous. I had shared my idea with exactly the right people at exactly the right time. After Jennifer's presentation, a few key area managers adopted the plan, immediately went to work, turning it into a life-saving reality. Strong competitors became partners. Media and law enforcement worked side by side. Valuable airtime was relinquished willingly. And after approximately 9 months of their heart-centered teamwork, the FCC gave its blessing and the first Amber Alert was issued in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the first 2 alerts yielded no results whatsoever. Nothing happened, and they were seriously considering scrapping the plan. But they decided to give it one more try, you know, the third strike. And on that third try, the Amber Alert resulted in the rescue of a kidnapped infant within 45 minutes. And as they say, the rest is history. And by the way, during that time, there was a change of personnel at KDMX, and that letter was lost. So I was out of the loop, and I remained anonymous for the next 6 years. And I was okay with that because this was never about me. This was about saving children, and it was working. I just took it as God's way of reminding me this plan does not belong to me. It belongs to the children of this country and now 22 other countries around the world. Shortly before the Amber Alert was signed into law by President George W. Bush, one of our popular Fort Worth columnists ran an article saying, "If we only knew who she was." Well, you remember my friend Tom. He responded to the article immediately and put me in touch with its author, Bud Kennedy. And from that day forward, I was no longer anonymous, and I was actually even invited to the White House for the signing of the bill. That was such an incredible honor, and I cannot begin to describe the feeling when I got to meet and actually hold some of the children that had been rescued as a direct result of this alert. As of today, we have 881 successful rescues in this country alone. And for that, I want to thank you. You and all the good people in this country who participate when you hear those alerts go off and have brought those children home safely. I helped make it possible, but you make it work. And for that, I am forever grateful. We are all responsible and response-able to make this a better, safer, kinder world for everybody. But you must take that first step. If you have a thought, an idea, a vision, give it your voice. Speak up, speak out, and don't ever give up. And don't let anyone, including yourself, ever tell you it's impossible, it'll never work, it's too difficult, or that you're not enough. One person can make a difference, and I can prove it 881 times. Thank you.